Welcome everybody to this panel on China as an all-out offensive in cyberspace. Of course, a very interesting and also political sensitive topic in many areas. My name is Hauke Giro and I am the head of corporate communications for G-Data Cyber Defense. We are a German IT security company providing everything from endpoint protection to security awareness and specialized security consulting. And in a former life, I studied Chinese and political science, and I worked at the Mercator Institute for China Studies for some time, where I also did quite a lot of research on Chinese cybersecurity topics. Of course, China is always a challenge for us here in the West. And I think we will see in this panel today that China actually challenges us in more areas than we probably think of. And to help me with this discussion, I have two great guests. They will both come via live stream, and I hope the connection is ready. And so the first is Candice Trandai. She is a Group Chief Information Security Officer at Groupe Lefebvre-Sarrut. So she has a lot of technical background, a lot of background from the company side of things. And she's also actively involved in a couple of research projects. So she works with the Global Foundation for Cyber Studies Research in Washington and the Asia Center in Paris. Candice, hello. Can you hear us well? Candice, can you hear us? Hello? Okay, great. And the second panelist is Roger Kremers. He is an assistant professor in modern Chinese studies, joining us from Leiden University. And so Roger also has a background in law and works really deep into policy, all kinds of policy things in China. He worked also a lot on what we call the social credit system in China. So yeah, two very interesting panelists. And to start off, before I give my first question to Candice, I want to say that I think it's important that we keep in mind that China basically has a wider definition on what cybersecurity is than we have, right? So we look a lot on, let's say, is a connection secure? Is a company secure? Like, how does it affect national security? But in China, of course, the whole topic is discussed in a broader sense, also in the sense of information security and informatization of the whole society. And I think this is important to keep in mind that there's a lot about ideological security in it in China. And yeah, so I want to give it, ask Candice the first question. So from the company perspective, how do you look at China? What is it that you see, and what is it that for you is the most interesting part about China and cybersecurity? Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Hauke. So your question is very broad. So I think I'm gonna stick to cyber security aspects. And then I think my colleague Roger gonna bring out a much broader view regarding various cyber aspects, but I'm gonna stick to cyber security, if you don't mind, because we don't have much time.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So what I would like to highlight as a first point is that I will try to demystify some aspects regarding China and cyber. But first of all, just for a contextual let's say, a statement. We all know that China is willing to become a cyber power, and that it aims to create, let's say, on the one hand, a robust network infrastructure, on the other hand, strengthen its independent innovation. And then, of course, the third point is to build a comprehensive information economy. And so from this point, we have to keep in mind that I would say Chinese elite see innovation, infrastructure, and the information economy as a way to avoid, let's say, the middle income trap of developing countries. And of course, to pursue economic growth, and ultimately, of course, to become a cyber power. So from dealing with this, let's say, broad context, we have to keep in mind that regarding cybersecurity, China has always been keen to highlight indigenous innovation, technology self-reliance, and technology self-sufficiency. So regarding, if I can develop a little bit about that aspect, we see that China has consistently been working toward a strategy based, let's say, on two concepts regarding cybersecurity. That is, the first is network security review, and the other one is independent controllability. And in other words, but I guess my colleague Roger will elaborate on that. In other words, we have to keep in mind that foreign technologies ought to be reviewed and controlled to safeguard the country's critical infrastructure and network information infrastructure. And then I will elaborate on just as a wrap-up, we can say that China's cyber security strategy is closely linked with other national security priorities, and this, we have to keep this in mind. And the second point is the cyber dimension in China. It has been progressively and consistently, especially in last years, in the last few years, integrated into China's national strategy. That is, technology capacity has become a benchmark for international competition, and China is really willing to be a winner in this international benchmark. And then the third point is that what we've seen, and I know that my colleague Roger will elaborate on that, is that there is an ongoing trend towards reinforcing and consolidating political leadership over all cybersecurity issues. And I mean all dimensions of cybersecurity issues. I guess, Roger, you're going to talk, for instance, about the multi-year layer protection scheme that might be interesting for the audience. But I think I will let you elaborate on that. So then I will come to my point that you have, of course, three, I would say, a few recent interesting initiatives regarding China in the cyber domain. So that's going to be the first point. And then the second point, I'm going to show you that China has still a long way to come, has still some hurdles to overcome in this, with this global aim of becoming a cyber power. So I think a recent aspects I would like to mention. It was very recent this summer in July. China has published a draft that is a cybersecurity industry 3-year plan. So you know that the Chinese administration is very keen about developing high-level strategic plans. So this plan is no different from the typology of plan that is very high level, very ambitious. But what is interesting, what is interesting, and I think we should bear that in mind, is that the draft is actually mandating that key industries, such as telecommunications and other strategic sectors, devote at least 10% of their IT budget to cybersecurity by 2023. By 2023, those strategic sectors should devote at least 10% of their global IT budget to cybersecurity. So this is I'm just highlighting some concrete examples for you. So the second one, and I know that Roger will elaborate on that, but I'm gonna mention it, not elaborate on it. Is that we've been witnessing a tightened regulatory context for Chinese tech actors. And then we know that this denotes a shift of the Chinese government approach to data, I would like. So what it means is that for China, data is now an essential resource for the national economy, and China wants to tap into those data, and of course the government will also protect those data. So what does it mean for us as foreign companies as well? It means that we have to keep in mind that we have to cope with a kind of emerging Chinese data governance regime, still in the making, but making way forwards. And this has concrete implications both for domestic tech actors. We had this issue about DD's tech giant DD's US IPO. I think you've seen that in the media, but there are other types of other cases like that. So this is the second point I wanted to highlight. And the third point is that we also forget, because it's still in the making, that since 2017, if I'm not mistaken, China is building what it calls a national cybersecurity center. And it is being built in Wuhan. And this huge site is to include 7 centers for research, specialized schools, entrepreneurship schools, government-focused laboratories, etc., and a big national cybersecurity school. And so I wanted to mention that because it will enable me to to switch to the second aspect, the second dimension, that is China is still facing some challenges on the road towards becoming a cyber power. So the National Cybersecurity Center I just mentioned is actually showing us that China is lacking qualified manpower and adequate skills in certain priority and strategic sectors, and especially cyber, of course, but we all know that this is the case for all countries over the world. But China is really focusing on education, cultivating and nurturing local talents in those areas. Because the country is definitely coping with a talent shortage. And this is the case in AI, for the AI industry, and also in the IC industry, integrated circuits, so it's the same. And of course in cyber. The other challenge, I would say, besides the lack of qualified manpower, is still that China is still having a kind insufficient basic research. That is, the bulk of Chinese R&D is still largely focused on applied research and product development. And so this leads me to the third challenge, that is the country today is still heavily dependent on foreign technologies. So I think you are all very aware of that. But it is really a concern for the Chinese government. And the fourth and last challenge, and then I'm going to stop here, I guess, because Hauke, is that I think on this road towards becoming a cyber power, China has also to cope with very heterogeneous levels of, let's say, industrialization of Chinese companies at large. So because we all know that we have very high-level strategic plans like the Industry 4.0, Made in China 2025, and other kinds of high-level plans. But still on the ground, when you look more in detail, you can see that there are still some huge gaps, and depending also on the sectors, and also depending on the geographical areas. So I think I talk too much, Hauke.
So, no, it's very interesting, and I like your point.
I think I better stop here, right?
Well, no, thank you for your input. It's really fascinating. I think I like your the idea that to look at China like with much more detail, and that not every company and that every ministry in China has the same level of proficiency, right? And that China is not like one big block that is homogeneous. So, but yeah, thank you for your input, and I would now turn over to Roger. And I mean, your knowledge of policy and of law was mentioned quite a lot of times, so I'm really excited for your input and for you to tell us something about the Chinese understanding of the whole information space, and then also the approach to regulating it. So Roger, please take it from here.
Thank you very much. It's good to see you again after such a long time. Et bonjour à tous. Merci de m'inviter aujourd'hui. Et j'espère que
I hope that I have something to share with you,
mais je continue en anglais.
but I will continue in English anyway.
Candice was already talking about the cybersecurity center in Wuhan. And I'm not going to make any bad jokes about Wuhan and viruses. Sur Wuhan et des virus. But the National Cybersecurity Center tells us something very interesting about the way in which China envisions digital. Oh, something very interesting. It tells us something very interesting about the way in which China views technology. And when we talk about cybersecurity, we have to remember that cybersecurity in China is only one half of a two-legged policy of cybersecurity and informatization.
Are you still with us? Maybe China didn't like what he was going to say.
There I am again.
Oh, Roger, I think you're back now with us. There was some disturbance in the force.
Sorry about that. But to continue, what we need to think about is, what does the Chinese government think digital technology is for? And this is a Leninist developmental-oriented government. And so what it wants to do, it wants to use digital technology as a magic bullet, as a cheat code to solve problems.
Non, une baguette magique.
And so cybersecurity is defined as any possible risk to the use of technology in a way that engages with China's development goals. Now, what does that mean? It means that cybersecurity isn't just a technological matter as we see it in the West. We see cybersecurity as related to hacking and malware. The CIA triangle: confidentiality, integrity, availability of network systems and data. And that is where we focus our cybersecurity strategies. We are looking at malicious actors, malicious software, malicious hardware. The Chinese, on the other hand, look at cybersecurity from a full spectrum perspective, where the integrity of technological systems is important, but by far not the only component. So, for instance, when we look at the cybersecurity law, the first thing pretty much that it talks about is content control. To the Chinese, the 2016 election of President Trump was a clear cybersecurity matter, whereas for the Americans, at least where Facebook was concerned, nothing cybersecurity related happened. The use of politically targeted advertisements, even resulting in the distortion of a very important democratic process, because it didn't involve hacking, did not really come under the purview of the definition of cybersecurity. Now, what this means is that the Chinese government will say things that they think are related to cybersecurity, which we find strange. Content control is one of them. The regulation of data is another and very important one. Now, over the summer, China passed 2 data protection laws. One is called the Personal Information Protection Law. And anyone acquainted with the GDPR would immediately recognize what that is and what it tries to do. The other is called the Data Security Law. And this is something that, as far as I'm aware, is unique among major digital powers. What the Data Security Law tries to do is to deal with, to respond to data-enabled risks, not to the individual, but to national security and the public interest. This requires that all network systems are categorized into a tiered system, a hierarchical system, based on the importance of their data, whether it is personal data or any other data, industrial control data, you name it. And the risk they potentially pose to national security and the public interest. This hierarchical system is, in turn, is based on something called the multi-level protection system, which requires all network systems to categorize themselves, again, on the basis of their importance to the national economy, political stability, the people's livelihood, and other collectively defined interests. And the higher tiered a particular network system is, or the higher tiered a particular set of data is, the more there will be government oversight. And that will include things like annual inspections, data audits. Companies have to establish internal cybersecurity departments. They will have to allocate particular or specific amounts of money and resources to that. Candice already mentioned the 10% cybersecurity spending in the plan that came out this summer. And that will also therefore involve close government oversight on things like software updates, the installation of patches, whether particular hardware is still secure and needs to be replaced, and so on and so forth. And so from the Chinese perspective, what cybersecurity regulation means is a much greater devotion of resources across the entire digital sphere to identifying and mitigating risk. And obviously there's much more to say, but I will stop here for the moment, and Hauke, I will see where you want to take the discussion.
Yeah, maybe let me ask a follow-up question. You talked about the cybersecurity law and the data protection law. And of course, when people from West look at China, they basically say, you know, it's all surveillance, it's all really bad, but there is also some interesting ideas I think they have behind this. But so maybe you can talk a little bit about that and about who is it aiming at? Are these laws trying to instill trust in digital technologies within China for the Chinese citizens, or who should be the benefactor of these laws and regulations that are being discussed or that have been put up in the last years?
So the purpose of these laws in general is very simple. It is to ensure that the Communist Party of China can fulfill its policy goals without facing technology-originated risks. And part of that is indeed control of citizens, control of society. This is, very clear when it comes to content control. But at the same time, it is mitigating cybercrime. And very often we underestimate the amount of cybercrime that happens in China, where telecommunications fraud is a daily problem for citizens. But controlling citizens, controlling society is only one very small part of that. It is also ensuring that critical information systems keep running. Think, for instance, about the NotPetya impact on the British health system. China doesn't want that. At the strategic level, it is about being able to engage in confrontations with the United States. The fact that the United States still produce so much technology that China has to rely on is a national security risk, particularly in view of the Trump administration's export sanctions against China. And it should be noted that the Biden administration has not reversed those sanctions. And cybersecurity touches on all of those levels with an increasing amount of detail. And so I would argue that cybersecurity is rapidly becoming an organizational principle for the way that the Communist Party does its business in social governance, in economic governance, in foreign policy.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I have another question for Candice, but I wanted to say that it's of course will be possible to ask questions here in the room. So when Candice finishes, I think somebody will appear magically with a microphone. So you can think about what you want to know from the panel. And Candice, you talked about the Chinese ecosystem in the area, and that there's a lot of development going on. And as we all know, trust is basically the main and the biggest currency in the IT security field. So do you first foresee that that actors from China in the security realm specifically will play a bigger role internationally than they're doing now? I mean, we all know the discussion about Huawei and 5G networks, and they're even more sensitive areas. Or do you think that the Chinese government may be aiming more towards developing countries or other countries when they want to create a broader market for security solutions?
Thank you, Hauke, for that question. I think it's already the case. Like the last aspect you mentioned, what is China doing regarding digital and cyber in developing countries? I mean, it's already the case, and especially we know that the first sector is, of course, telcos. The telcos. I think we all know that. But of course, there is also the cybersecurity dimension. So I think this is nothing new, and I believe that it's, as Roger mentioned, as cybersecurity in China is, and this is the objective, is to be integrated in all aspects of the Chinese economy, but also policy. And also foreign policy. Thank you for mentioning that, Roger, because it's important. I think the Chinese cybersecurity industry is already working on, let's say, internationalization, international market access. But we all know that it's not an easy task, especially in some specific countries, because when we deal with cyber, we rapidly encounter national security issues and national sovereignty, national security. So, and I think we all know that. Then your first point regarding what about the domestic cyber industry and cyber ecosystem. What we can see, I mean, besides the giants or the giant tech companies, which have somehow and somewhat a cyber activity, and I'm not mentioning Huawei, which is, we all know about Huawei, but other type of tech giants who are also working on cyber. What is interesting is that what we see in China is the startup ecosystem. So I think we have to take a look on much more smaller actors in the cyber industry in China. Some of them are quite interesting, quite focusing on, let's say, innovation, and some of them are quite innovating. And we forgot to focus on them. We're only focusing on the giants like Alibaba, Huawei, and co. But this local ecosystem is very interesting, and the Chinese government is willing to develop and nurture this, let's say, smaller layer.
Thank you. So are there any questions here from the room? Anything you want to know from the panelists? Don't be shy. So maybe, Roger, another question for you. Where you also already mentioned the sanctions that Donald Trump put up against China. Do you think this helped China in a way to develop their own ecosystem to push harder to do something and to strengthen the idea that they need to do more to not be dependent so much on other countries?
To give the short answer, yes, I think that was a long-term cost for a short-term gain. Now, one of the interesting things about the development of the Chinese digital economy is that very little of it happened in the way that the government planned. So when you look at the digital industry, the government has plowed enormous amounts of money in operating systems and semiconductors with very little effect, really. At the same time, the tech giants in hardware and software are private companies, and their success surprised many in government. Now, these companies are obviously, they operate within the Chinese context, and even still, they have a relatively good relationship with the government. But that didn't mean that they were going to support all these government development projects. So in microchips, let us look at Huawei. To make its smartphones, Huawei needed, to make mobile devices, you need the most advanced chips because they use the least power. Huawei, or at least its sub-company HiSilicon, can design them, but the design tools are all, American software, or in some cases, German software. There are, at the moment, no production facilities in China that can make these chips. So China got them from Taiwan, from TSMC. And this was, from an economic perspective, a very successful structure. Huawei became the largest smartphone producer in the world. It's not anymore the largest smartphone manufacturer in the world because of the sanctions, but until then, it was doing really well. So that meant that there was no market for domestic Chinese chips because companies like Huawei weren't buying them. And you need a market to digest the billions and billions of investment that you need to build up a modern semiconductor sector. What America has done now is created that market, because there are now Chinese companies with deep pockets who will spend those billions simply because it's been demonstrated to them that they may no longer have reliable access to components.
So as one idea that I had, and maybe to widen a little bit. So we talked a lot about the domestic industry in China, and but the overall topic of our panel is China an all-out offensive actor in cyberspace. And I want to just want to bring your attention that, of course, China is has a really strong impact on how Western companies operate, what they can do, and how they should operate, right? So if you look at Apple, the company basically runs their own iCloud for Chinese customers that everybody believes that the Chinese government has access to, right? So, and Apple is a company that, of course, in its marketing and its value proposition talks a lot about privacy and data security. Microsoft allegedly allowed China to basically use their own encryption algorithms inside Windows 10, right? So China has a huge impact on global companies that, and I think we shouldn't underestimate that. And I'm wondering if somebody on the panel would like to jump into this point also.
What do you mean, how specifically? It's not very clear to me, your question.
Well, so China, of course, regulates what like domestic companies can do or can't do, and they regulate what kind of software maybe also international companies can use when inside China. But as I mentioned, the examples of Apple and Microsoft, they also have like quite clear rules of the road for companies, international companies, like operating in China or serving Chinese customers. And I think they forced like Microsoft or Apple to do something that I think the European Union never could. And what's your, do you have a thought on that?
Oh, okay, it's clear. I'm going to make a very short answer, and Roger, I think you're willing to elaborate on that. I can see it. Very short answer. It's interesting because Håkon just said that Apple, Google, Facebook, and companies were forced to comply, but I think there's something we have to keep in mind. There were we must also keep in mind that they are willing to comply. I mean, we can see that in other countries where Facebook, for instance, is cooperating very actively with the digital censorship system in place in some other countries. So this is a very short answer. I think we cannot say that they are forced to comply. I think it's a both-way dynamic. They are also willing to comply. And we also remind, we have to remind, and this is 15 years ago, in 2006, the Google dilemma in China. It was the early story of Google in China. I'm sure you all remind that.
Yes, to continue on that, there is no one who has taken a gun to the head of Tim Cook or Bill Gates and said, you will now go into China. These companies are there because they believe it's essential to profits, and this is the capitalist world that we live in. China, like the European Union, uses the size of its market to impose regulatory constraints. Where in Europe, we do that for European purposes, which are obviously informed by liberal democratic principles. China does exactly the same thing for the realization of principles which are rather different. But the mechanism is the same. If you want to be in the Chinese market, you are going to follow our rules. Now, how can you say that this is impacting a lot, many foreign companies, if I understand you correctly? But there are actually only very few foreign companies that have a significant market presence in China. And of those, Apple is the only one that routinely delivers online services to users. So part of that is cyber sovereignty. The Chinese government prefers to have an indigenized technology world where indigenous companies provide indigenation. So the Chinese government wants Chinese people to use Chinese devices, Chinese computers, connected through China-built infrastructure, using Chinese operating systems on which Chinese companies offer online services. And we must expect that in every area where Chinese companies do not yet dominate, there will be policy to ensure that they will in the future.
So I think this would be the last chance to ask a question here. Yeah, I found it, this was a really fascinating discussion. I think the topic is really, really wide, and so it's, but I think we were able to help a little bit to broaden the view on what is a Chinese approach to cyber, basically, because it's very different from the discussions that we are having here, and it's a very interesting and special ecosystem, I have to say. I also find it interesting and worthwhile quite often to look at how we name things and what they mean, right? So if you look at, I did this for a study when I was at the Mercator Institute a couple of years ago, to basically say, where are we coming from when we talk about cybersecurity? And when we do that in Germany, where I come from, we talk a lot about critical infrastructure protection and about safety against natural disasters and all these kind of things, and then of course about data protection. When you look at the US, the whole it's much more comes from a national security perspective, right? And now we look at China and we say, okay, there is a really holistic view on the topic, and there's many things that I personally disagree with, like how they do it, but I think there's much more thought behind it than we often think in the West. Yeah, so I want to thank my panelists, Candice and Roger. If there's anything you want to share, please do it now. But yeah, it was really fascinating to talk to you. And so I always needed to look to the left, to the big monitor. So I need to rearrange my head after this discussion. But it was nice seeing you this way.
Can I just add one line?
Go ahead.
Okay. I just quite like the end of your talk, your remark that you just, as you said, but I don't know because I have the translator in my ear, so I'm not sure. It's what you said, but you said that Chinese thinking is much more elaborate than West thinking regarding cyber and cyberspace, or digital, or yes, cyber, let's say. But I would like to stress that, and I'm sure it's your point, the point here is not that we are not thinking or elaborating schemes or plans here in the West. It's not the difference is for me that China has consistently been developing a long-term strategy, long-term view. And I would like to highlight that because, and this is really clear to us, and I think Roger and Hauke do agree with me. And this is a major difference from the West thinking, and especially regarding digital and cyber, where here we do have, I would say, I mean, generally speaking, a much more short-term view, or at best a mid-term view, depending on the countries. But please don't forget that China has always, I mean, China has time. China has time. And the ultimate objective is 2049. I mean, for the whole new status of the country, etc. You know. So I think it's. I just wanted to add that Hauke, just to make sure that the audience is not mistaken
but
from your last remark. But I think you know what I mean, and Roger as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you said China has time. So during my studies, somebody made this half jokingly that the Chinese view on the French Revolution is history will tell if it's a success. Or it was a success, right? So China is used to thinking much more long-term than we do. Yeah, I totally agree about that.
If I can just add to that.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes left, so go ahead.
Two things, one thing per minute. One, I think Candice is completely right. China has time, but also China did not win the Cold War. And for China, that was a good thing. Because what happened to us after the end of the Cold War is we became lazy in our thinking. Our assumptions took over. Democracy will always win. Democracy is better. Technology is always good. The private sector is, always in the lead, and so on and so forth. And the crisis in cyber that we face now, as well as the crisis in our broader politics and economics, are the consequence of that laziness.
Yeah.
China has not been that lazy. And so China's diagnosis with regard to the consequences of widespread informatization are far more correct than ours, and they did it a decade early. And so even if we disagree with the Chinese solutions, and there is much to disagree with, we have to recognize that there is a very significant amount of competent thinking that happens there. My second thing is about the fact that we all seem to think about the national level. And this connects to something that I call the Great Normalization. In the 90s, 2000s, we saw technology as something special, something exceptional. And so normal laws of gravity, economic laws of gravity, political laws of gravity did not apply. These days are over, and increasingly we will deal with technology like any other thing. So technology will no longer be that separate thing treated as an exception. It will be integrated in all of the process we know about global governance, diplomacy, international relations, domestic economic and social governance.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that thought. I think we need to clear the stage now, but I think it's a really good perspective to take home, that we shouldn't be lazy in our thinking, and that history hasn't really ended after all. And this is also true in cyberspace, of course. So yeah, thank you again to Candice, to Roger, for sharing your thoughts here. And yeah, have a good stay in cyberspace. Thank you. Bye-bye.